2:10 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. Commander Elias Thorne felt the steady hum of his F-35 Lightning II fighter through the floor of the cockpit. This was not another routine patrol or a symbolic show of force over the Strait of Hormuz. Today, Thorne was the tip of a spear aimed directly at the heart of the Iranian nuclear program. His target was the Fordow enrichment plant, a facility buried so deep beneath a mountain that only the heaviest munitions could reach it. The question was not whether he could hit the target, but what would happen to the world the moment he did. The night sky was a vast sheet of black velvet at 28,000 feet. Below, the lights of coastal villages flickered like dying embers. To the north, the Iranian border waited in total darkness. Thorne adjusted his oxygen mask and checked his fuel state. Everything was functioning perfectly. Behind him, 3 more stealth fighters moved, in a silent, staggered formation. They were ghosts in the sky, invisible to the radar nets stretching across the desert floor. 2:12 in the morning, 70 miles east of the border. Inside the hardened air defense bunker at Fordow, an Iranian technician stared at a flickering green display. His unit operated the Russian-made S-400 missile system. It was one of the most advanced tracking arrays in the world. On the screen, there was nothing but electronic noise and empty air. Yet, the technician felt a deep sense of unease. He had spent 10 years watching these skies. Experience told him that the Americans were too quiet tonight. He leaned toward his microphone and spoke to his commanding officer. "Major, the coastal sensors are reporting a momentary dip in ambient signal. It could be atmospheric, or it could be a ghost."
Battle stations. We have confirmed contact at 3 coordinates 4A. Deploy the fleet and scramble all available.
Bring the tracking radars to high-intensity standby. If they are out there, I want them to know we are watching. 2:14 in the morning, Central Iran. Thorne saw his tactical display update instantly. The Iranian radar sites were active. They were searching for him with everything they had. Yellow icons bloomed across his visor, indicating enemy search patterns. He remained calm. His aircraft was designed for this exact environment. As long as he stayed on his assigned flight path, the enemy would see nothing but a glitch. He reached out and flipped the cover on the weapon release consent switch. He was less than 60 miles from the release point. In the back of his mind, he thought about the carrier strike group waiting. In the Arabian Sea, thousands of sailors were standing at general quarters. They were waiting for the flash that would signal the start of a new war. Thorne keyed his secure radio. "Raven flight. This is Raven 1. We are 5 minutes from the window. Check in." His wingman responded immediately. "Raven 2. Ready. Raven 3. Systems green. Raven 4. Weapons armed." 2:15 in the morning. The final approach began. Thorne focused on the digital countdown in his helmet. The guidance systems were locked onto the coordinates of the main tunnel entrance at Fordow. The heavy bunker buster bombs were primed and ready to drop. He had 45 seconds until the mission became irreversible. The cockpit was silent except for the sound of his own rhythmic breathing. Suddenly, a sharp burst of static hissed through his headset. It was followed by a clear, steady signal. Thorne stiffened. This was not the encrypted military channel. It was not the emergency guard frequency. The transmission was coming through on a private, low-power frequency he had not used in years. It was a frequency known only to his immediate family. A voice spoke. It was soft, calm, and entirely out of place in a combat zone. "Elias, you need to listen very carefully. Do not open the bay doors." Thorne froze. His thumb was resting on the release button. The countdown hit 30 seconds. His heart hammered against his ribs as he stared into the dark. The voice was unmistakable. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 2:16 in the morning. The Fordow Air Defense Command. Major Arash looked at the secondary thermal array. For a split second, a heat signature had flickered near the mountain peak. It was gone before he could mark it. He felt the sweat cooling on the back of his neck. The American stealth fighters were out there. He knew the doctrine. They would be flying low, using the terrain to mask their approach before popping up for the final release. He turned to the weapons officer. Activate the infrared search and track system. Do not use the radar yet. If we ping them, they will fire anti-radiation missiles. We wait until they are within 15 miles. The weapons officer nodded. His hands hovered over the launch keys for the surface-to-air missiles. Major, there is a strange pulse on the broad-spectrum monitor. It is not coming from the Americans. It is coming from the facility itself. Arash frowned. Explain. The enrichment hall is broadcasting an unencrypted signal on a very high frequency. It is low power, almost like a beacon. 2:17 in the morning. Inside the cockpit of Raven 1, Commander Elias Thorne was paralyzed. The voice in his headset was not just a recording, it was his father. But his father had been dead for 6 years. The tone was exactly as he remembered it. Calm, authoritative, professional. Elias, the voice repeated. Look at your diagnostic page 3. The weapon logic has been compromised. If you release, the payload will detonate inside the bay. It will not reach the ground. Thorne's eyes darted to his display. His fingers moved with muscle memory, cycling through the sub-menus of the tactical computer. Everything looked normal. The green lights indicated a healthy weapon system. The countdown was at 20 seconds. Raven 1. This is Raven 2. His wingman's voice broke in. You are drifting left of the track. Correct your heading. We are at 15 seconds to release. Thorne did not answer. He felt as if the air in the cockpit had turned to lead. Was this a hack? Had the Iranians found a way into his personal life and his flight systems? It was impossible. The F-35 used a closed-loop encryption system that would take a century to break. 10 seconds, Raven 2 called out. His voice was more urgent now. 1. Confirm your state. Doors should be opening. 2. 18 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln. Admiral Sarah Vance stood behind the radar technicians. The giant wall-sized displays showed 4 blue icons moving toward the target. Suddenly, the lead icon began to wobble. The flight path was no longer a straight line. It was erratic. What is Raven 1 doing? Vance asked. Her voice was sharp. Ma'am, he is off track, the controller replied. He has not opened his weapon bays. He is over the release point now. He is overflying the target. Without dropping, Vance leaned forward. Get him on the net. Now, Raven 1. This is Lincoln. You are past the window. Confirm mission status. Over. There was only static in response. 2:19 in the morning. Over the target. Thorne watched the mountain pass beneath him. The release window had closed. He had failed the mission. He had disobeyed a direct order during a combat operation. In any other circumstance, this was the end of his career. It was, potentially, a court-martial. But the voice came back. It was no longer his father. It was a series of rapid, rhythmic clicks. It sounded like a high-speed data transfer. His entire flight display began to shimmer. The icons for the Iranian radar sites turned from yellow to bright red. Raven 1. This is Raven 2, his wingman shouted. The Iranians just went active. They have a hard lock on the whole flight. We are being targeted. Brake left. Brake left. 2:20 in the morning. The ground was no longer silent. The sky around Thorne erupted as 4 surface-to-air missiles streaked upward from the desert floor. The Iranians were no longer guessing. They knew exactly where the American planes were. Thorne pulled the stick hard to the right, screaming into the radio. Raven flight, execute defensive maneuvers. Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. 1. Why are we not firing? Raven, 2 yelled. I have a tone. I am taking the shot. Thorne looked at his wingman's icon. Raven 2 was rolling into a firing position. Negative. 2. Stay with me, Thorne commanded. He didn't know why he said it. He just knew that the voice on his radio was still clicking. And now, he could see something on his radar that shouldn't exist, something that was sitting directly between his flight and the Iranian missiles. The first missile reached its apex. It did not explode, it simply stopped. 2:21 in the morning, the Fordow bunker. Major Arash gripped the edge of the console until his knuckles turned white. The 4 surface-to-air missiles should have reached their intercept point by now. Instead, the telemetry feed showed a flat line. On the primary radar, the missiles were still in the sky. They were simply hanging there, 5,000 feet above the desert floor. It defied every law of physics and ballistics. Arash barked a command. "Report. Why have they stopped?" The weapons officer shook his head. "Major, I have no data. The guidance links are active. The fuel state is nominal, but the projectiles are at 0 velocity. It is impossible. I am trying to reset the uplink." "The Americans," Arash whispered. "They have activated a new electronic countermeasure. They are mocking us." 2:22 in the morning. Inside the cockpit of Raven 2, Lieutenant Commander Miller felt the G-force press him into his seat as he rolled his aircraft into a high-angle attack. He had a solid lock on the Iranian radar site, near the mountain base. His finger was steady on the weapon release button. Miller shouted into his mask. "Raven 1! I have!" The shot. "Engaging the target now." Thorne responded immediately. "Negative. 2. Do not fire. Break away." "Sir, they shot at us. I am taking the site down before they reload." Suddenly, Thorne's F-35 banked sharply. It swept directly in front of Miller's nose, less than 50 feet away. The proximity alarm in Miller's helmet shrieked a collision warning. He jerked the stick back to avoid hitting his commander. The wake turbulence tossed his fighter like a leaf in a storm. Miller yelled into the radio. "1. What are you doing? You just blocked my lock. You almost killed us both." "Stay in formation," Thorne replied. His voice was unnaturally calm. "We are not engaging." 2:23 in the morning. Over the Iranian desert, the static in Thorne's headset cleared once more. The rhythmic clicking stopped. The voice of his father returned. It was more urgent now. The voice spoke. "Elias, look at your master caution panel. The logic is shifting. If you fire, the detonation will trigger a chain reaction in the enrichment hull that cannot be contained. It is not just a bunker buster. They have changed the core of your payload. You are carrying a weapon you do not understand." Thorne looked at the panel. A single amber light flickered. It was the weapons bay door sensor. But beneath it, a new line of code was scrolling across the display. It was a sequence of ancient coordinates and thermal signatures he had never seen in a military flight manual. Admiral Vance's voice came through the long-range link from the carrier. "Raven 1, this is Lincoln. You are in violation of direct orders. You have overflown the primary target. Return to the mission profile immediately, or we will designate you as a hostile platform." Thorne looked out his canopy. The 4 Iranian missiles were still suspended in the moonlight, glowing like frozen stars. He looked at Miller's aircraft on his wing. He knew the carrier's tactical team was already vectoring a second strike package to his position. Thorne spoke into the radio. "I cannot do that. The mission is compromised." He reached for the master power switch for his weapon systems. He flipped it to the off position. The tactical display in his helmet went dark. He was now an unarmed pilot in the middle of a sovereign nation's most sensitive airspace. Thorne closed his eyes for a second. "I am aborting. Raven flight. Follow me out." 2:24 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln. Admiral Vance stared at the blue icons on the main tactical glass. Raven 1 was turning south. He was moving away from the Fordow facility. The 3 other aircraft in his flight were hesitant. They were lagging behind their leader. The mission was collapsing in real time. Vance turned to the strike controller. "Tell Raven 2 he is now the mission lead. Order him to re-engage the target. If Commander Thorne interferes with the strike, Raven 2 is authorized to use force." The controller paused. "Admiral, you are asking for a blue-on-blue engagement." Vance did not blink. I am asking for the mission to be completed. If those bombs do not drop now, we will be at war by sunrise. Commander Thorne is compromised. Do it. 2:27 in the morning, over the Iranian desert. Lieutenant Commander Miller heard the order from the carrier. It was a cold, mechanical voice over the satellite link. It told him he was in command. It told him his flight leader was now a threat. The controller spoke. Raven 2, this is Lincoln. You are mission lead. Proceed to the primary target. Use of force is authorized against any platform obstructing the strike. Miller looked at Thorne's aircraft. It was a dark shape against the stars. They had served together for 5 years. They had flown dozens of missions in 3 different theaters. Now, his head-up display was highlighting Thorne as a hostile target. Miller keyed his radio. Raven 1, this is 2. I have been given the lead. Step aside, or I will be forced to engage. Thorne responded. Miller, listen to me. The weapon system is not what they told us. Miller's voice was shaking. Sir, I have a direct order from the Admiral. I am turning back. 2:30 in the morning. The Fordow bunker. Major Arash watched the radar screen with growing confusion. The American flight was splitting up. One aircraft was continuing south. The other 3 were banking back toward the mountain. The frozen missiles still hung in the air. Behind them, a silent testament to the strangeness of the night, Arash turned to his staff. They are fighting each other. The Americans are in a command crisis. The weapons officer looked up. Major, we have 2 more squadrons launching from the southern bases. We can trap them between our interceptors and the mountain. Arash hesitated. No, not yet. Something is wrong. If we fire now, we might unite them. Let them break themselves first. The tactical situation was becoming a 3-way standoff. The Iranian Air Force was closing in. The American carrier was ordering its own pilots to fire on their commander. And in the center of it all, Elias Thorne was flying toward a destination only he could see. The air was cold. The tension was absolute. 2:31 in the morning. Mehrabad Air Base, north of Tehran. The roar of twin engines shattered the silence of the airfield. 2 J-20 stealth interceptors accelerated down the runway and lifted into the black sky. Their pilots were the elite of the Iranian Air Force. They had been sitting in their cockpits for 3 hours, waiting for the order that had finally come. Inside the lead interceptor, the pilot checked his long-range radar. He saw the chaotic cluster of signatures near Fordow. There were American F-35s moving in conflicting directions. There were stationary objects that his computer struggled to classify. It looked like a battlefield in the middle of a nervous breakdown. He spoke to his wingman. Guard, this is Guardian 1. Vector 220. We will intercept the Americans before they reach the mountain range. Rules of engagement are free. If they are in our airspace, they are targets. 2:35 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln. Admiral Vance watched the new red icons bloom on the screen. The Iranian interceptors were moving fast. They were less than 8 minutes from the strike package. The window for a clean operation was gone. Now, it was a race to see who would fire first. The strike controller looked at Vance. Admiral, the J-20s are supersonic. Raven flight is slowed down by the maneuvering between Thorne and Miller. If we do not authorize Miller to clear the airspace, we will lose the whole flight. Vance gripped the edge of the plotting table. Miller, this is Lincoln. You have 60 seconds to resume the attack profile. If Raven 1 continues to obstruct, you are cleared to engage him with a Sidewinder missile. Do you copy? There was a long pause. The static hummed on the line. Finally, Miller's voice came through. It was tight. Lincoln. Raven. 2 copies. Engaging the master arm. 2:38 in the morning. 10 miles from the Fordow Peak. Miller pulled his aircraft into a vertical climb, attempting to get above Thorne. He needed a clear line of sight for his targeting laser, but Thorne was anticipated the move. The F-35 moved with a grace that seemed to defy the heavy atmosphere. Thorne stayed directly between Miller's nose and the mountain. "Get out of the way, Elias," Miller shouted. "Get out of the way, Elias," Miller shouted. "I do not want to do this." Thorne's voice was steady. "Then do not do it, Miller. Look at your fuel. Look at the interceptors coming from the north. We are being led into a trap. This is not about the facility anymore." "I have my orders," Miller replied. He flipped the switch on his flight stick. The tone in his headset changed to a high-pitched growl. The heat-seeking missile was locked onto the exhaust of Thorne's engine. Miller's thumb moved to the red button. 2:40 in the morning. The sky over the desert. The situation reached its breaking point. The Iranian J-20s were now 30 miles away, locking their long-range missiles onto both American pilots. Miller was locked onto Thorne. Thorne was flying with his systems dark, relying on pure intuition. In the Iranian bunker, Major Arash saw the convergence. Every player was on the board. Every weapon was armed. The entire geopolitical balance of the region was resting on the trigger finger of 3 different pilots who did not trust their own instruments. Thorne keyed the universal guard frequency. He spoke to everyone, to his wingmen, to the admiral on the carrier, to the Iranian pilots closing in. "This is Commander Elias Thorne of the United States Navy. To all units in this sector, look at the horizon. Something is happening that is not on your screens." Far to the east, a light began to grow. It was not the sun. It was a pale, pulsing blue that seemed to bleed out of the stars themselves. 2:41 in the morning. The Iranian desert. Lieutenant Commander Miller felt the aircraft vibrate as the Sidewinder missile logic reached a full lock. The tone in his headset was a continuous, screaming growl. His thumb rested on the red launch button. He could see the heat from Elias Thorne's engines through his targeting pod. It was a perfect shot. Inside the cockpit of the J-20, Guardian 1 adjusted his visor. He was 10 miles out. The American fighters were clustered together. They were distracted. It was a target-rich environment. He keyed his radio to his wingman. "Guardian 2, select the trailing aircraft. I have the lead. Fire on my mark." "Copy," the wingman replied. Radars locked. Weapons ready. 3, 2, 1. Mark. 2 missiles dropped from the internal bays of the Iranian stealth fighters. They ignited with a roar, streaking through the night at Mach 4. They were programmed to ignore flares and home in on the specific heat signatures of the American engines. 2:41 and 30 seconds in the morning. Admiral Vance stood motionless in the Combat Information Center. Miller. "The interceptors have fired. Defensive maneuvers. Now, I have the lock," Miller shouted, firing. The Sidewinder leaped from Miller's wing rail. It was a white-hot streak of light aimed directly at Commander Thorne. In that same instant, the 2 Iranian missiles crossed the 5-mile threshold. 3 high-speed projectiles were now converging on a single point in the sky. Thorne did not move his stick. He did not pop flares. He did not bank. He looked toward the horizon, where the blue light had transformed from a pulse into a towering wall. It was a curtain of shimmering energy that stretched from the desert floor to the edge of the atmosphere. "Elias, break away!" Miller screamed. He realized too late what he had done. He had fired on his friend. He had followed an order that would end a life and start a war. He watched his own missile closing the gap. 300 meters. 200. 2:42 in the morning. The ground beneath the Fordow facility began to groan. In the bunker, Major Arash fell as the concrete floor buckled. The monitors on the wall exploded in a shower of sparks. The green radar sweeps vanished, replaced by a blinding white static. "Major, the energy levels," the technician yelled. "They are off the scale. It is coming from the enrichment hall. But it is not nuclear." Outside, the mountains seemed to breathe. The air itself began to hum with a frequency that vibrated through the metal of the aircraft. It was a sound that felt like a physical weight pressing against the pilots' chests. The Sidewinder was 10 meters from Thorne's engine. The Iranian missiles were 20 meters from Miller's wing. The J-20 interceptors were pulling into a high-speed climb. The blue wall hit them. It was not a shockwave, it was a transition. The sound of the engines vanished. The screaming alarms in the cockpits went silent. The heat of the missile exhausts simply went out. The sky went from black to a terrifying, absolute white. 2:43 in the morning. The white light did not fade. It collapsed. One moment, the world was a blinding glare. It was a hollow, echoing gray. Commander Elias Thorne felt his stomach drop. The roar of his engine was gone. The steady vibration in his seat was gone. The F-35 was no longer a fifth-generation fighter. It was a 25-ton glider. Every screen in the cockpit was a sheet of dead glass. The sophisticated helmet-mounted display was a useless plastic shell. He was flying blind in a dead machine. He looked to his left. The Sidewinder missile that had been inches from his engine was gone. It had not exploded. It had not been redirected. It had simply ceased to exist. There was no smoke trail, no debris, only empty air where a lethal weapon had been a heartbeat before. He looked to his right. Miller's aircraft was there. It was wobbling in the thin air. The landing lights were off. The navigation strobes were dead. Miller was staring at him through the canopy. His hands were off the flight stick. Both pilots were masks of pure shock. 2:43 and 15 seconds in the morning. Inside the foreign military stealth interceptor, Guardian 1 grabbed the manual flight controls. His fly-by-wire system was non-responsive. The stick felt like it was set in concrete. He watched the two missiles he had fired vanish into the gray mist. They did not hit anything. They did not fall to the desert floor. They were erased from the sky. He looked down. The mountain facility was no longer a mountain. The ancient rock seemed to be vibrating, becoming semi-transparent under a shifting veil of energy. Deep inside the earth, a geometric shape was rising. It was a spire of matte black material that seemed to absorb the starlight. It was miles long. It was pushing through the crust of the earth, as if the mountain were made of water. 2:43 and 45 seconds in the morning. Inside the underground nuclear facility bunker, Major Arash stood in total darkness. The emergency lights did not kick in. The heavy lead-acid battery backups were dead. The chemical glow sticks on the walls provided the only illumination. His technician's voice came from the corner. It was trembling with a primal fear. "Major, my watch has stopped. My mechanical watch. The gears are not moving." Arash looked at his own wrist. The second hand was frozen. Time had not stopped, but the physical laws of the room had changed. He felt a strange, metallic tingling in his teeth. The air smelled of ozone and something older, something like dry stone and deep space. "Get to the surface," Arash commanded. "We need to see." 2:44 in the morning. Above the desert, the 4 American fighters and the 2 foreign military interceptors were caught in a single, invisible current. They were no longer falling toward the earth. They were being pulled toward the black spire. They moved in perfect synchronization, 6 dead aircraft drifting like ghosts toward the center of the anomaly. Thorne reached for the manual ejection handle. He pulled it with all his strength. Nothing happened. The explosive bolts did not fire. The canopy stayed locked. He was a prisoner in a multi-million-dollar coffin. He looked at the spire. It was not a weapon. It was not a building. It was a door, and it was opening. A single pulse of sound vibrated through the air. It was not a noise. It was a thought. It was a word. It was spoken directly into the minds of every pilot in the sky and every soldier in the bunker. It carried no accent and no malice. Enough. The gray mist vanished. The stars returned. But the sky looked different. The constellations were skewed. The moon was too large. The world had moved. 2:44 in the morning. The silence was absolute. Then, the cockpit of Raven 1 flickered to life. One by one, the digital displays rebooted. The familiar green glow returned to the glass. The hum of the environmental systems filled the small space. Commander Elias Thorne felt the stick vibrate under his hand. The engines had relit themselves. It was as if a master switch had been toggled by an invisible hand. Thorne checked his primary flight display. His altitude was steady at 20,000 feet. His airspeed was 300 knots. He looked out the canopy. The black spire was gone. The mountain at Fordow looked solid again. But the stars above were wrong. The Big Dipper was twisted. The North Star was missing. Thorne keyed his radio. "Miller, do you have power?" Miller's voice came through. It was thin and breathless. "I have power. 1. My systems are green, but the Sidewinder is gone. It is just gone from the rail. Stay calm," Thorne said. "Look at your navigation. Where are we?" Miller paused. "The global positioning system is searching. It cannot find a satellite. The inertial navigation says we are over Iran, but the terrain radar is showing an ocean where the desert should be." 2:46 in the morning. In the Fordow bunker, Major Arash stared at the main screen. The power had returned with a surge that smelled of ozone. The radar sweeps were active again, but they were not showing the American strike package in their original positions. They were showing a coastline that did not exist in the Middle East. The technician looked up. "Major, the radio. We are receiving a signal. It is on all frequencies." Arash leaned in. "Is it the Americans?" "No," the technician said. "It is a broadcast, in every language. It is a set of coordinates, and a warning." The voice from the radio was the same one they had heard in their minds. It was cool, precise. "The conflict is suspended. You have been relocated. The borders of your world have been redrawn. You will remain in your assigned sectors. Do not cross the new lines." 2:48 in the morning. The Iranian J-20 interceptors were now flying alongside the American F-35s. There was no maneuvering for a kill. There were no radar locks. The pilots were looking at each other through their glass. They were 6 men in the sky, thousands of miles from the homes they remembered. Guardian 1 spoke on the International Guard frequency. "Raven 1, this is Guardian. My fuel is low. My base is gone from the map. Do you see the land to the west?" Thorne looked. A massive, glowing city sat on the edge of a dark sea. It was not Tehran. It was not Dubai. It was something else entirely. "I see it," Thorne replied. "We are landing. Together." "Agreed," the Iranian pilot said. 2:55 in the morning. The USS Abraham Lincoln was no longer in the Arabian Sea. Admiral Vance stood on the bridge and looked at the horizon. The water was a deep, impossible violet. The sensors reported that the ship was now in a freshwater lake the size of a continent. The escort destroyers were still in formation, but the world they were meant to protect had vanished. Vance spoke into the fleet communications. "All ships, set condition Zebra. This is no longer a combat operation. This is a survival event." The horizon began to glow with a sunrise that was the wrong color. The orange was too deep. The yellow was too pale. 2:56 in the morning. The edge of the unknown sea. Commander Elias Thorne looked at his fuel state. He had 22% remaining. It was enough for 30 minutes of flight at his current altitude. Beside him, the Iranian J-20 interceptor drifted in the violet light. The two aircraft were no longer adversaries. They were survivors. The mission to destroy Fordow was a memory from a world that had seemingly folded into itself. Thorne keyed his radio. "Guardian 1, my sensors are picking up a high-intensity landing array 10 miles ahead. It matches no known military or civilian pattern. I am beginning my descent. Will you follow?" The Iranian pilot responded immediately. "Raven 1, I see the lights. They are perfect. Too perfect. My systems are identifying the surface as a composite material. It is harder than concrete. I am with you." 3 in the morning. The landing. The 6 aircraft approached the massive runway. It was 3 miles long and half a mile wide. It sat on a peninsula of black rock jutting into the violet water. There were no towers, no hangars, no ground crews, only a series of soft, pulsing lights that guided them down with mathematical precision. Thorne touched down first. The wheels of his F-35 met the surface with a whisper. There was no vibration, no friction. The aircraft slowed to a halt as if it were being caught by an invisible hand. One by one, the other 3 Ravens and the 2 Iranian Guardians landed behind him. They lined up in a perfect row. 3:10 in the morning. Thorne opened his canopy. The air that rushed into the cockpit was cool and smelled of wild jasmine and salt. It was breathable. It was clean. He stood up in his seat and looked around. The massive city he had seen from the air was 5 miles to the north. It was a forest of white spires and floating platforms. There was no smoke, no noise, no traffic. He climbed down the ladder and onto the black surface. A moment later, the Iranian pilot, Guardian 1, jumped down from his own jet. He removed his helmet. He was a man in his late 30s with graying hair and eyes that looked as if they had seen the end of time. The two men met in the center of the runway. They did not shake hands. They did not reach for their sidearms. They simply stood in the silence of a new world. "Where are we?" the Iranian asked. His voice was a rasping whisper. "I do not think, where is the right question," Thorne replied. "The navigation data in my jet is cycling through thousands of years. The stars have shifted because we are not in the 21st century anymore. Or perhaps we are not on Earth." 3:20 in the morning. The USS Abraham Lincoln. Admiral Vance stood on the flight deck of the carrier, the Violet Water. The violet water lapped against the hull of the massive ship. The entire carrier strike group was anchored in the center of the lake. The sensors were finally providing a clear picture of the surrounding land. The strike controller walked up to her. He was holding a tablet. With a shaking hand, "Admiral, we have managed to bounce a signal off the moon. Or, what we think is the moon." "And?" Vance asked. "The crater patterns are different. It is smaller. And there are lights on the dark side. Structured lights. Artificial." Vance looked at the sky. "We were 30 seconds from starting a war that would have burned the Middle East. Instead, someone or something moved the entire theater of operations." 3:30 in the morning. On the black runway, the voice returned. It did not come from the radio. It did not come from the air. It came from the ground beneath their feet. "The weapons you carried have been neutralized," the voice said. "The fuel in your tanks will not deplete. The hunger in your bodies will not grow. You are the first of the piece. You will wait here until the others arrive." Thorne looked at the horizon. In the distance, more lights were appearing in the sky. Hundreds of them. They were the heat signatures of aircraft from every nation on Earth. Russian flankers, Chinese J-10s, French Rafales. All of them were gliding toward the Black Peninsula. The crisis had not resolved. It had been harvested. 7:30 in the morning. The Black Peninsula. Commander Elias Thorne sat on the edge of the intake of his F-35. He was watching the sky. It was no longer a single arrival every few minutes. It was a constant stream of metal and fire. Over the last 4 hours, 42 aircraft had landed on the black surface. He saw the distinctive silhouettes of Russian Sukhoi 35s, Chinese J-16s, and even a pair of Israeli F-16s. The pilots did not stay in their cockpits. They climbed down, walked to the center of the runway, and stood in small, silent groups. There was no shouting. There were no attempts to seize high ground or claim territory. The presence of the White City to the north and the deep violet water acted as a psychological anchor. Every man and woman on the peninsula understood the same fundamental truth. Their weapons were useless here. Their orders were obsolete. Thorne looked at his watch. It was still frozen at 2:43. Time was passing. He could feel it in the fatigue in his joints and the dry heat on his skin, but the mechanical measurement of it had been discarded. 7:45 in the morning. The USS Abraham Lincoln. Admiral Vance stood in the Combat Information Center. The room was bathed in the dim red glow of emergency lighting. Though the main power had long since stabilized, she was looking at the long-range sensor data. The carrier was no longer alone in the Violet Lake. "Report," Vance said. Her voice was steady, but it carried the weight of a woman who had just lost her world. The strike controller pointed to the tactical map. "Admiral, 3 miles to our north, the Iranian frigate Alborz has surfaced. 5 miles to the east, we have a Russian Akula-class submarine sitting on the surface. They are not responding to hails, but their radars are in standby mode. They are as confused as we are." Vance nodded slowly. They were all part of the theater. Every asset that was keyed into the Fordow strike profile has been pulled through. It is not just a tactical displacement, it is a strategic harvest, ma'am. The analysts are calling it the Fordow Event. They believe the energy signature from the enrichment hall triggered a failsafe, not a human one. 8:15 in the morning. The landing zone. Thorne walked toward the Iranian pilot, Guardian 1. The man was sitting on his helmet, staring at the white spires of the city. He looked up as Thorne approached. "My name is Major Reza Karimi," the Iranian said. He spoke English with a soft, melodic accent. "Commander Elias Thorne." Thorne replied. He sat down on the black rock beside him. Karimi gestured toward the line of parked jets. "Back there, I was supposed to kill you. I had the lock. I had the authorization. My finger was on the trigger." "I know," Thorne said. "I was 30 seconds from dropping 2 tons of high explosives on your countrymen. We were both following the logic of the world we left behind." Karimi looked at the city. "And now? What is the logic here?" The voice said, "We are the first of the piece," Thorne said. "I do not think we are prisoners. I think we are a sample, a collection of those who were about to break the peace. We have been removed from the equation so the equation can continue without us." 9 o'clock in the morning. A new sound began to echo across the peninsula. It was not the roar of a jet or the hum of an engine. It was a low, resonant chime that seemed to come from the water itself. On the carrier, on the black runway, and inside the foreign military bunker that had also been displaced, the same message appeared on every screen. It was not in English or Farsi. It was a sequence of symbols that resolved into a single, undeniable concept. The message read, "The transition is complete. The probability of global extinction in your original timeline has been reduced by 84%. Your presence here is the cost of that reduction. You will now begin the integration." 12 hours after the first contact, the crisis at Fordow had resolved. There were no casualties. No missiles had reached their targets. No nuclear fallout had poisoned the desert. In the original world, the strike package had simply vanished from every radar screen at 2:43 in the morning. To the planners in Washington and Tehran, the war had ended before it began, because the combatants had ceased to exist. On the Black Peninsula, Elias Thorne stood up. He looked at the hundreds of pilots and sailors gathered under the violet sky. There was no celebration. There were no cheers. There was only the quiet, professional acceptance of a new mission. They were no longer soldiers of different nations. They were the residents of a new reality, drafted by a force that valued the survival of the species over the pride of its borders. The Fordow Event was over. The history of the human race had just been rewritten by an editor who did not take suggestions.